Today we've got a few people speaking. I've got myself speaking about various building approaches from around Australia, followed by Maree Grenfell from Cairns talking about her range of different tools at their council. Euan Williamson will talk about the City of Yarra's building policy and tools. And then Paul Brown from Ironbark will talk about some funding approaches for certain sustainability capital works. So jumping straight in, councils own a lot of different buildings and there's a lot happening. There's new buildings, there's major refurbishments happening, there's minor retrofits. You've got equipment breaking down such as hot water and they need to be replaced all the time. There's also a range of different sizes and complexity of buildings. There's your admin centres through to toilet blocks. So you've got council staff needing to strategically manage buildings, and sustainability is, of course, only one of many core deliverables they need to achieve. They're also addressing OH&S, safety and good quality for the community. So setting targets and assessment approaches that are easy for everyone to understand and use is imperative. The question is what to use and when. There's certainly no shortage of tools out there. It's just working out when and where to use them. So we've developed a bit of a matrix to communicate where some of these tools can be useful. We've divided large and small facilities up, and then design and operations. I'll just show you some tools for large facilities first. Now you can see there's some ticks and then some dollar signs. The ticks stand for sustainability outcomes and the dollars stand for the effort needed to use and set up these tools. So starting with Green Star, Green Star generates a rating and also outlines ways to improve that rating. You can get really excellent outcomes from Green Star, but it is fairly expensive to use, certainly if you are going to be accredited. Some councils actually choose to use the Green Star tool but not get formal certification for it. Now for existing buildings, so for buildings in operation, the only rating tool available for council buildings is Neighbours, and that is actually applicable mainly for offices rather than any other building types that councils manage. We didn't give it as many ticks as, say, the Green Star one because it's essentially a benchmarking tool. It assesses current performance rather than prescribing ways to improve performance. Just a note, Green Star is about to launch a pilot tool for existing buildings, so watch that space. Level 2 audits, they're a really accurate way of finding out information on existing equipment in a building and how a building's performing, as well as outlining opportunities for improvement. We've given many ticks to level 2 audits, but just keep in mind that if audit recommendations aren't actually implemented, then of course there are no sustainability outcomes. Just moving on to small facilities. There's some in-house design guidelines and also technical specifications that councils use for building designs and existing buildings. So I'll just point to it with my mouse, so there and there. They can be really effective. If they're developed in collaboration with key staff, it means they can be tailored to suit council's particular needs. They can, however, be quite resource intensive to develop and certainly resource intensive to keep up to date, which is why I've put a few dollar signs in brackets. That's relating to setup costs. Sustainable Design Scorecard at the top here. It's a really simple tool. It rates and advises on ways to achieve sustainability, and it's developed and updated by a group of Victorian councils. It's not only for Victorian councils, however. It's recently been developed for New South Wales councils, and anyone can actually use this tool. It might just need to be adapted to suit your particular climate and state. Moving on back to operations, sustainable small facilities. You can see written here. I often recommend to councils we're working with to spend as little time as possible on small facilities, simply because they're not using much energy and water and therefore don't warrant too much too much time and effort. They are, however, really worthy of addressing because there's some easy things that can be done to improve them. And also, in our experience, gets some really positive feedback from members of the community. The small facilities are usually community facilities, and going in there and doing something about sustainability always gets positive feedback. What we do recommend is some kind of packaged program, which means you can address and then forget. Okay, energy and water consumption is another key tool for measuring. It certainly doesn't prescribe what can be done to improve a building, but it's key for tracking achievement, given that one of the key aims of sustainability is to minimise energy and water use. Tracking how you're actually achieving that. Energy and water consumption allows you to actually track that. There are some cases, certainly with large facilities, and certainly if you're using sub-meters, where tracking energy and water use does lead to reduction through identification of certain anomalies. For example, it allows you to identify if lights or heating and cooling systems are left on when the building's not in use. Now, what I want to move on to now is who's doing what. And I just want to say this is not an exhaustive list of what all councils around Australia are doing, but it's councils that Ironbark has been in contact with over the years. So starting with a broad overview, most councils are using Green Star for their flagship buildings. So by flagship, those very large buildings where they want to make a statement. Certainly a lot of Victorian councils are using the Sustainable Design Scorecard. That's been an Excel tool, and it's currently, they're adapting that into a very simple online tool that will be even easier to use. And there are some New South Wales councils looking into this tool as well. Now, audits down here for existing buildings. Most councils will be auditing all their buildings that have a large energy and water spend, and that's the main way that they address sustainability. Some are using neighbours. Oh, I didn't mean to change that slide then, hang on. Some are using neighbours, but only for admin buildings. Again, most councils are tracking energy and water consumption, but only for larger buildings and some of their smaller buildings. It can be very hard for councils to track every single building just because managing that data is often quite tricky. In terms of in-house tools, so tools that are developed in-house, there are many councils going down the road of developing their own design guidelines, and we'll be hearing from Maree from Cairns later on about Cairns's ones. And then there's also councils that use technical specifications that are developed in-house for existing buildings. So maintenance staff and contractors can easily work out what equipment to use when they're replacing broken equipment or installing new equipment. Now I just want to show you who has set some of these tools in as policies. So which councils have actually set formal policies to commit to using these tools on an ongoing basis. I'm going to start with Cairns and Yarra, given that we've got presenters from that council starting. And I just warn you, this slide does get a bit dense. So you can see that these councils use a mix of different tools. For their large buildings, you have Green Star. Cairns and Yarra are using Green Star. I'm just going to pause. Paul, are you moving around a bit? I can hear a bit of background noise, and I do have you off mute.
Okay, I promise to be still.
Thank you. So, okay, for example, Cairns is using Green Star for big buildings, and then they're using their own design guidelines for some of the smaller building designs. You can see Yarra featured in many of these boxes. Yarra has been using Green Star, Sustainable Design Scorecard. It's actually got some commitment around building audits by saying, okay, any audit recommendation with a 10-year payback or less should be strongly considered for implementation. And also they have one for energy consumption, where buildings need to reduce a certain percentage of energy. Okay, now I'm just going to go to the next slide, which shows you some other councils. And again, this is not exhaustive, and there are more details in a building management options paper that we have on our website as well. So again, you can see Bayside use both Green Star and STS for new building designs, as do Hobsons Bay and Port Phillip.
Lucy, could I jump in and just add a couple of things? Could
Sure.
you pop back up to the last slide?
Yeah.
So it starts getting reasonably complicated when you're looking at these different things, but one of the things that's useful to keep in mind is that within councils you're dealing with different stakeholders. So for a design process, there's, I guess, well-worn routes around how buildings are designed, funded and managed. And it's really just about understanding those routes and injecting sustainability oversight at the right points. They tend to be different people or different stakeholders within council than when you're dealing with operations. So a lot of councils, so you can see in this slide that Bayside has largely tackled the design side of it, but they have done less work at the operational level, or certainly on this slide. And it's a common approach that you might say, well, let's sort out design first and get that working. From the operational side of things for councils, this is more about asset management and long-term planning. And so you tend to be dealing with different stakeholders, building maintenance staff, asset managers, it could even be facility type, so you might be dealing with childcare centres, for example. And so discussing what their options are around auditing, implementation and reporting over time tends to follow a different conversation internally. And so you'll often find councils who may have sorted out design but haven't sorted out operations, and the other way around. And it's really common for lots of councils to be pretty good on large buildings, but pretty bad on small buildings. So you don't have to do every single one of these things in one step. You can focus on one particular area, but it's useful to know that in time you actually need to sort out all 4 quadrants to have a long-term sustainable building management process within your council.
Great, thanks, Paul. I'm just going to move on to the next slide now. So what I just want to talk about for a couple of minutes is the fact that it's all very well to commit to certain standards and say, yes, we're going to use this, but one key element is to actually identify who will drive these approaches and tools and at what stage in each project or maintenance cycle they're going to be used. I've heard of a few councils say that they have certain standards in place but are often too busy to check for compliance or even use these tools. One suggestion could be that before formally committing to certain approaches through a policy, it could be useful to trial some of these first in a pilot phase to just nut out how to get the best results from them. One thing that is for sure is that it will require someone with some basic knowledge of sustainable building practices. So I just want to show you an example of how the sustainable design scorecard can be used, just to give you an idea of on the ground how you can actually use this tool to not only set a performance standard, but to actually use it to review a design. So one key thing is to communicate what's required from architects and designers by sending them a letter and giving them the Sustainable Design Scorecard tool. And then it's a matter of reviewing their design to making sure that they are complying with your required standards. Now, if they're not complying to it, as is the case in this point 2, you can see that they haven't complied, is to communicate, okay, you haven't complied because of this. Here are some possible improvements. One thing to note is that in our experience for small buildings, asking the designer to do a self-assessment, so to check themselves whether they have complied to your standards, doesn't work. In every instance that we've reviewed it, it's been inaccurate. The final process would be to check results. So when the building's actually being built, have they done what they said they were going to be? That's part of any standard building commissioning process. Now, in terms of who checks for compliance, some councils do have internal resources, such as a sustainable design officer who can drive this. The other option is to outsource. I'm just going to move on now. Paul, do you have any comments before I do?
Yeah, I guess this is actually probably the most critical slide of the whole presentation, because it talks about functionally how are you going to implement any recommendations. So you can replace Sustainable Design Scorecard with any tool. So it could be an in-house tool, it could be Green Star or whatever. We've found that it's really common to actually brief the architects about some of the tools if they're not familiar with them. And for small facilities in particular, we find that they don't have dedicated ESD engineers or ESD officers. So helping the architects is actually really important. In terms of the reviewing of the design process, it is useful to actually ask them to self-assess, but you can't believe them, with all due respect, because for small buildings they tend to not be ESD experts, and so you won't get consistency around scoring, and they tend to overscore, which is probably human nature. And so in terms of councils, you tend to have two types. One who can always employ more people to do more good things, and the other type of council is people who never or hardly ever employ internal staff. And to some extent that will drive whether you outsource this or whether you internalise it. The key consideration around whichever approach you take is timing. So as with any referral process, which this would be, time frames and cost are critical. So you really need fast turnaround so that it doesn't delay the project at all. From a project manager's perspective, time frames are critical. That's it.
Great, thanks, Paul. Now, before I move on to handing the reins over to Maree from Cairns, I just wanted to show you another example of a tool in practice by looking at existing small facilities. So small facilities in operation. One quick way to do it is to visit a site to rate, retrofit and audit it. So in one visit, you're doing three activities. Once you've got that information, what you can do is set targets and benchmark. So set targets for how much you want to improve each facility by. You can use the results to plan and report on outcomes. And then you can also use the audit results to set long-term budget requirements. And again, as Paul said, you can use this framework also for your larger buildings as well. All right, so that's it from me. Please keep in mind, if you've got any questions, you can either email them to us later or use your control panel and we'll try and answer them as we go along. I'm going to hand over to Maree now, so we'll just change presenter and change screens so we can see her presentation.
Hi everyone. Now just to check, Lucy, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Yep. And can you see the webinar screen on the right-hand side, or is that not showing to you?
That doesn't show. All I see is your slide.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. All right. Thanks everyone, and thanks to Lucy and to Ironbark Sustainability for hosting this webinar. It's such an important topic, and it's an area where there are so many opportunities for council to improve sustainability performance. Up in Cairns Regional Council, we embarked on a process of embedding sustainability into the council's operations and projects. And following on from that initiation, we decided to refine where we wanted to go by looking specifically at building design. And being up in the tropics, there's actually not too much work that has been done in the tropical climate. So, and you know, obviously the weather's very different to being down in Melbourne or in a temperate climate. So what we tried to do was to, I suppose, build up a bit of a case for why making our buildings more sustainable was important, and a lot of that came through just being able to quantify our annual electricity consumption for all of our buildings that council is responsible for, and to be able to quantify, you know, it in terms of cost, so you know, operational costs and the increase or the predicted price increases around electricity consumption into the future. So, you know, for example, our council has an electricity spend of around about $11 million every year, with an expected increase of around about 15 to 20% each year. So that's a pretty high, you know, pretty big liability for ratepayers and for council. What we decided to do was, after, I suppose, meeting with identifying all of the relevant people in this space, which involved meeting with a lot of the asset owners across council who were also branch managers, and also with facilities management, who are one of our operational business units who actually implement a lot of the work in terms of electricity retrofits and building work, and also our project services team. So for us, we developed a suite of tools to try to improve our sustainability response with our buildings, and that included a policy, a checklist, and a set of guidelines. Before I go there, I might actually just skip to the next slide just to talk a little bit about the process, which to me was something that was really integral in the whole project. So the image that you can see that is like a bit of a Visio chart was our attempt to map the process that council undertakes to, first of all, decide that it either needs a new building or B, needs to retrofit an existing building. And this usually comes from either a need being expressed in the community and communicated to council, or from an asset owner internally realising that that's what was required. So at that point, the asset owner, who generally we found has had no experience in building design, sustainability, anything to do with the constructed world of buildings, contacts one of our business units, either facilities management or project services, and says, hey, we need a building. And then some pictures start to be drawn. And for us, we were a little bit horrified that the process didn't really involve much professionality, and facilities management would tend to say, well, we only do what the client tells us to do, and then the client says, well, we don't actually know what we want to do. So so there was a little bit of it really uncovered for us some of the issues around process within, and probably what Paul mentioned before, between kind of a strategic area of council and the operational on the ground delivery, and how to marry those two things up. So when we went through and identified the process that was undertaken, we went through a lot of workshop processes with the asset owners and with our facilities management team to understand exactly where in that process we could slot sustainable building design in, and how to make sure that it was integrated in the initial upfront quotes for a building, how it was actually embedded into a tender process or whatever process was employed for that kind of building and construction stage, and then how to make sure that the sustainability criteria were included also in the completion of the project, and were basically signed off like any kind of quality control mechanism that you experience in an operational project. So I'm just going to go back to the slide that I had there before. So I suppose what we really felt was that the policy was important to set the intent of the entire process, which was, I suppose, getting council's authority and council support that this was something that it valued, which in turn gave us authority to act from our area, which is in a strategic planning area with the rest of council. We developed a set of guidelines, which is the third point there, and they are a document that we produced which basically provides advice and information about sustainable building design for the tropics. So it's climatic responsive building design for the tropics, and it's specifically for commercial buildings, although I suppose the design intents can really be transferred to a domestic scenario as well. And we've released that to the public to assist the industry up here, because the more that we can inform the industry, if we're employing the industry to do some of our work, then they've been brought up to speed on what our values are. And then we developed a checklist. And when I say that we developed, look, we did this by a lot of undertaking a lot of research as to what has been done already in this space. And the tool that Lucy and Paul were talking about, the sustainable design scorecard, that is used, down in Victoria, especially, around Port Phillip and by Moreland, or that's where it started. We did have quite a few conversations with those councils to I suppose, work out how we could kind of build on what had already been done instead of starting off at point zero. So we have integrated some of the ideas that have been designed by those councils. We've also looked to Green Star and the checklist within the Green Star tool, and we've used some of those ideas as well. And I suppose that's where we build on and create a bit of an evolution, hopefully continuous improvement in the way that we work within local government. So I might just show you quickly what these tools look like, and they're all available on our website. So and I think that Ironbark might have them in the Tech Hub as well. Is that right, Lucy? Are they still there? Okay, anyway, this is the Sustainable Building Design Policy, and I suppose purely the intent of the policy was really to reduce environmental impacts of the building, to reduce operational costs into the future, to demonstrate leadership or to really walk council's talk, to improve energy efficiency, reduce reliance on non-renewable electricity, and to also improve the indoor environment, so hopefully increase productivity and be a little bit better for the community. So I won't go through that, but really the intent, I suppose, is that the scope is really applicable to all new and renovated or retrofitted council buildings. So that's that one. The guidelines document is, let me just have a look here. Nope, that's not that one. The guidelines document is here. And it's an attractive document. It's not too detailed. It has lots of pictures and relevant case studies for the Cairns region, which is something that we felt was really missing. It pretty much goes through and talks about these 5 design principles, which we've based the checklist on as well. So we tried to keep the message really consistent and talk about energy and emissions, water and wastewater, indoor environment quality, waste and construction materials, and also the local environment. So they're the 5 design principles we really focus on in the checklist, and also by providing information in this guideline. So we talk a lot here about passive building design. We also go into some of the technical systems that you can use and that are being used in buildings. So I won't show too much more of that because you can access that on the internet. And then the Sustainable Building Design Checklist, we put it together ourselves. So we use just an Excel spreadsheet kind of system. It has information for anyone who's using it to understand how to couple it with the policy and also with the guidelines. We've got our lovely map there of the building design process, and then we have our checklist. So as I said, we have the Sustainable Building Design Principles, which are what I just mentioned to you, the energy and emissions, etc. And then under each of those categories or sustainable design principles, we have a series of performance targets. Now, as I said, Some of these are very similar to Green Star. Some of them we have looked at through the Sustainable Design scorecard as well. Now, we've basically allocated categories as to whether or not these are mandatory or whether or not they're optional, and that is something that the asset owner, in conjunction with whoever is designing and building, can go through themselves. So, look, it's not really rocket science. It's probably the sorts of principles that everyone has heard of before, and I suppose for us, really the most sorry, I'm just going to put the slideshow back on. Probably the most complex issue that we really had to deal with was being able to ensure that the process was followed, and that's a constant, for us. It's not like every project checks that checklist 100% of the time. I suppose what we're really trying to do is to embed the understanding and empower asset owners and managers within our council to understand more about what sustainability means and what it looks like on the ground, and also to be able to quantify some of their results.
Maree, I've just got a question. Do you mind if I interrupt with a question before you move on?
Not at all.
John from Burundaro is just wondering, how long did it take to develop the guidelines and checklist?
Look, I would say that altogether, from the beginning of actually getting people around the table to developing those tools, it probably took us around about 8 or 9 months.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, yep, that's okay. What I'm showing right now is something that has only just been produced, and much to my delight, this was produced by our facilities management team in conjunction with GHD, who they've worked on a couple of projects with. So what they intended to do was to take our checklist, especially some of the energy targets, and to create a document that could be incorporated into our tenders, specifically around electricity. So one of the, I suppose, barriers that the Facilities Management and Project Services team feel that they have is around being able to assess tenders that come in with new kind of technical ideas around energy management, or things like air conditioning systems, and all of keeping up to date with all of the technology, as we know, is a constant kind of challenge. So what they've done is they've developed a minimum energy performance standard document for all new capital works projects, and this we've reviewed, we're working on it at the moment, we're trialling it with a building that's currently being retrofitted, and hopefully what we will do is be able to get approval to use this as a document to embed in all of our future tender processes. The advantage I feel with this is that it really drills down into the energy space, and that's where I feel like we have a lot of opportunity. It's also a document that can be owned by facilities management because they've taken the initiative of really moving forward what we've produced in terms of our checklist. And then just finally, I suppose this is just a slide, and using our energy and emissions system, which is an online intranet tool, which enables us to collate, monitor and report on all of our energy consumption, energy costs and emissions from council's most high up level right down to individual facilities. And I suppose what we're able to do with this tool is to use it as a communication tool to talk to asset owners about how their buildings are performing. Now, these two charts or reports are from a very high level across council, and they show our emissions trajectory compared to our benchmark and target, the green line being our actual and the top line being where we started from, and the bottom line where we're aiming to go by 2020. Now, I'm not claiming that that big dip here is anything to do with buildings that was flaring methane at our landfill. However, what you can see is that we have been on a trajectory of reducing our emissions, and a lot of our assets, we can show asset owners that their efforts are being rewarded. Unfortunately, reducing energy consumption does not necessarily correlate with a reduction in cost these days. So that's even more, I suppose, opportunity to show that we just need to reduce more energy consumption to be able to even just keep our electricity prices the same. So that's probably all that I really wanted to say. I've probably gone a little bit over time. I'm not sure. Lucy, is there anything
No, that's great.
that anyone would like to ask?
Well, we do have a question actually from Lawrence Curdy from Liverpool. He asked it during my presentation. He's asked, but if you've got any input, that would be great. He's asked, is there any commonality around why some specific measures for councils aren't working? Is it a tool problem or a technical problem? My answer would be that in my personal experience, failure to use a tool properly is generally due to there not being enough time and attention given to what the tool offers to use it properly. And one solution can be to make the tool more simple, but then you can lose the detail that's required for good sustainability outcomes, or you can allocate more time in your project or capital works process. Do you have a comment on that?
Yep. I think there are so many reasons why things don't work, and often, I mean, look, lack of skills or knowledge is certainly one. I would tend to think that, I mean, a lot of our, I don't know how it is for everyone else that's listening, but I mean, within our council, I know that our facilities management area is very stretched in terms of human resources. They're also a business unit, so, and I know that councils are kind of structured in different ways, but what I find, one of my kind of constant bugbears, is that our facilities team, look, as well-meaning as they are, they need to get paid for all of their time. So in essence, they are really working as a consultancy who need to charge their time to a project. So in order for me, from a strategic unit who is not a business unit, in developing these tools to be able to work with facilities management, they need to charge their time out. So they're not so willing just to take on projects because they want to improve the way they do things. And look, that's just one of my observations. I don't know how relevant it is for other people. I think building tools that are easy to use, that don't take too much time, and that don't look too complex. And I think for everyone, probably competing capital works budgets are certainly a barrier to having this kind of work implemented. There are certainly competing priorities across councils and budgets these days. And I suppose, getting runs on the board and actually showing that by taking on these kinds of actions in terms of implementing sustainable building design saves you money down the track. Being able to validate that builds trust, and I think increases the possibility that you're allowed to do more in the future. And I would say that that's something that Euan would probably talk about from Yarra's perspective.
Yeah, great. Maree, thank you very much for presenting today. Can everyone keep in mind that you can ask questions using your GoToWebinar control panel. If you want to ask some questions to Maree, maybe now's a good time. And what I'll do while that's happening is I will change the screen sharing. So it'll be Euan Williamson, ESD Advisor for City of Yarra. Now, Lawrence Curtis just replied. He said, thanks. Our staff do need more experience with the tools and need to be given the space to do so. Thanks for your input, Lawrence. Okay, bye, Maree. Oh, no, I won't say goodbye yet in case there's other questions. I'll keep you unmuted, and I'll just change the panelist to Euan, which means Euan should be able to show his screen. I'll just unmute Euan as well. Okay, I can see your screen.
Okay, should be able to hear me now, yeah?
Yes, welcome, Euan.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. I've just put a rather bad quality photo of me up there, so just to introduce myself, you can see what I look like. Today, I'm just going to take you through some of the work we've been doing at Yarra around our ESD buildings policy. Basically, I haven't prepared a detailed PowerPoint presentation. I'll just put a few poignant dot points because just recently we reviewed the ESD policy and the performance of it, and found some interesting things that I think should lead on well from what Maree and Lucy were talking about previously. So my predecessor, Johanna, developed the ESD policy, which was adopted by Council in October. And it basically details ESD performance standards for all new, sorry about that. It prescribes ESD performance standards for all new buildings, refurbishments, maintenance, and demolition projects as well. So basically, I'll show you an excerpt from the policy in a moment and just take you through how we put it together. But basically, we've split in terms of tools, similar to what Lucy was presenting earlier today, looking at ESD performance targets for major projects being measured with the Green Star tool, and using the SDS for the minor, smaller projects. So I'll tell you more about that in a moment. So I just went through recently and reviewed all the capital works projects that were over a 50K project budget over the last 2 financial years, and compared what the outcomes were in comparison to what standards we'd set in the policy as a bit of a starting point, and basically undertook the exercise of going around and getting some feedback from all the staff that are involved. So this buildings policy, I mean, every council is different, but this particular policy was originally developed by the previous ESD advisor, who sits in the stat planning area. So I've got some drilling going on behind me. Building maintenance, hard work. So that it crossed a number of different areas of council, and I think that's probably one of the keys to the success. Was it was developed in conjunction with the environment team, who are actually in a different building, and so that's the environment and strategic transport team, as well as asset management and the capital works and construction team. So in the process of going through and looking at, I guess, how things have gone on the ground, I also spent a bit of time getting some, I guess, reflections and responses from the people involved with developing and implementing the policy, just to see what room there was for improvement, and I guess where things were a bit weak, how we could improve them. So that was kind of what I did first. Now if I scroll down my next PDF page, it just basically gives a bit of a, hopefully can see all that. When we developed the policy, we looked at a couple of alternative ways to rate buildings using Neighbours Energy and Water as well as Green Star. So, and then we presented to council 3 different levels of targets that basically could be chosen and selected. So from looking across the top for major new buildings, and they're typically large community hubs, you know, council administration centres, rec centres, and council select, as you can see, the level 3, the top level for actually all options. The background in this actually involved quite a lot of detailed costings for each of the different levels. So there was a feasibility study conducted that basically looked at what additional budget expenditure would be needed for these targets, and council selected the highest target, which is fantastic. As you may or may not know, Yarra has a very strong emphasis on sustainability and environment, and this comes from the staff as well as the council, so that's great. The minor new buildings, we're using a choice of tools, so SDS or Neighbours, and you can see that we've got the 50% benchmark exceeding target for the minor new buildings. So minor new buildings, childcare centres, those sorts of small facilities, some of the smaller sports pavilions, etc. We also put targets for renewal and refurbishment, maintenance of buildings, and demolition as well. Again, really, these are all quite ambitious targets that we set. So it's kind of interesting to see how they came out. And as I said previously, yeah, we had an independent feasibility study analysis done just to see basically how much this was going to cost us. So I was happy to report that things went really quite well, at least in terms of ESD performance anyway. So I looked at the 10 of the 32 total projects from the 12-13 financial year and 7 of the 15 major projects from the 13-14 financial year, which is approximately 40% of all the total projects. I had to manage my time carefully, but the good news is that comparing the outcomes against the targets in the policy, that the standards in terms of ESD are being met, which is good news. This does include, for example, the new North Fitzroy Library and Community Hub project, which is currently in design phase, on track for a 6-star Green Star rating using the new public buildings tool. So that'll be the first 6-star Green Star public buildings rated tool in the country, which will be exciting. And another, so that's an example of a major, what we'd consider a major building project. And a minor project would be an example of the Gold Street Children's Centre, so it's childcare and maternal and child health services, and that was well and truly on track to surpass the 50% target set in SDS. As those of you working in local government might find these next findings rather familiar, but you know, policies are all good and well, and they're put together carefully. However, I discovered that you know, the policy wasn't really widely referred to in day-to-day operations, and it was quite sort of largely unfamiliar to key staff who really should know it inside out. And interestingly enough, like particularly with the smaller minor facilities, that my perception was that a lot of the performance outcomes were occurring sort of on a rather ad hoc basis. I'm putting there in my notes, driven by the personalities of the staff involved. And basically, we were lucky enough to get people in our capital works team who had some basic understanding about what's required to make a building more sustainable, and were just keen to push it. They knew there was an expectation from the council and from other key senior management that new buildings had to be sustainable, but they weren't really referring to the policy as such. That it was, in my mind, an area that kind of needs to be tightened up. So after working with the cross-council team that I put together for the review, we've basically put a 2-year review on the policy, which is coming up next month. So basically, we're looking at a review of the standards and targets. Some of the tricky ones are actually about the maintenance and demolition targets, and even the major refurbishment targets. So it's, in some cases, difficult to measure in terms of access to baseline data. So, and really, there's no kind of guidance and protocol about how that's implemented. So we're looking at maybe changing how we describe the standards and the targets in the policy. Also, the SDS tool is currently being upgraded. I'm involved with the STEPS and SDS upgrade and integration project. There you go, that's the official title, with a number of other councils down here. Yeah, that we might actually change some of the wording in the policy to reflect the new scoring system that we're putting together for the tools. Luckily enough, from speaking to some of the executive at council, I've discovered that there's actually a new project management tool that's under development in the organisation. This is the sort of thing that really I stumbled upon by chance, just by getting around and talking to people. And I discovered that there's a new project management tool that's actually being developed across the entire organisation. So every project will have an online project management software that they to help people with their budget bidding, asset management, a whole range of different key components of the project management. So speaking with the developers of that particular tool, I'm able to embed the ESD triggers within that project management software, which basically means that if someone's undertaking a capital works project, for example, they will receive prompts in their own project management tool that's basically mandatory to complete that they need to sign off on before they can move on to the next stage. The other thing that we're going to set up in a bit more formal way is an internal referral system. So, as I mentioned before, I actually sit in the stat planning department, and I process ESD referrals for stat planning and development applications. So, basically, I review all new major developments in the municipality. And able to work with the planning team to help us improve the sustainability outcomes of development. So basically, similar to the process that we've got in place for that, we'll have a bit more of a formal referral system, so which will be triggered by the project management tool. So every time they get to going to a particular stage in their project, which is basically pre-town planning application, that'll be referred to me, and I can have some input into the design process. We're also looking at streamlining tender specifications, similar to the minimum energy performance standards that Cairns are working on, but basically putting together to make it easier when tender documents are going out, just to spec a whole bunch of minimum performance standards across all aspects of ESD. That basically, again, just helps to reinforce getting those targets in the policy, and looking at delivering in-house training to the capital works team, basically on the ESD tools, how they work, and just practical strategies for implementing them. So yeah, that's basically what I discovered and where we're at, and that's the end of my dot points.
Great, thanks very much, Euan.
No worries. I can see questions coming up on. I've never used this before, so.
There has been a question. We've got 5 minutes left remaining, so what I might do, that question, we'll save it to the end just in case we run out of time. There's a couple of questions that have come through. One, actually, maybe we can answer this one now. Can you recommend, sorry, this is Jenny from Stirling. Can you recommend particular products when you're doing tender specifications, or in the case of Maree, your minimum energy performance standards, to make it easy for maintenance staff and contractors? Are you allowed to recommend particular products, or do you just have to leave them as specs?
Look, normally when responding to those sort of requests, I would prefer to specify a performance standard, so rather than a product, because from a design perspective and a project management perspective, it just gives a bit more flexibility for the team to source particular components. And when I mean a performance standard, I would mean, for example, setting a minimum U value for glazing at approximately 3.5, a maximum solar heat gain coefficient of 0.5 or 0.6, and just key measurables that basically, when you're looking at glazing specs, it becomes clear across any manufacturer that will perform the way you want it to.
Yeah.
Coefficients of performance for air conditioning, those sorts of details. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Euan. I'm going to hand over to Paul now, and if there's any other questions that do come through, we can certainly answer them either after Paul's spoken or via email at a later date. All right, so over to Paul. I'm going to give you the reins, Paul, which means that your presentation should come up on screen, and I'll just unmute you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about the money, I guess. In particular, I'm probably going to focus mainly on money for operational projects. So you might recall that Lucy showed a little graph of funding that could required or cash flow over a 10-year period. I'm going to just talk about a few different ideas and some things that you may want to consider around funding. Obviously, the first option for funding is to get the cash. So upfront, council funds it. Very simple, and it's how most projects, both for ESD features in new designs and for refits occur. I'm not going to talk about that too much, but what I will spend a little bit longer on is discussing financing or delayed funding. Now, the reason I've called it either financing or delayed funding is there are many models that you can implement that isn't technically finance. For example, leasing. So for computer hardware, almost all councils don't buy computers, they lease them. And what that means is that you don't have to have those assets on the books, and there's some legislative requirements for councils around balance sheet liabilities, and delayed funding or leasing, as an example, can overcome those issues. You can pretty much these days do financing for any project of a decent size. There are costs associated and complications, so you wouldn't typically look at financing for simple and small projects, under 10 grand or whatever it is. What that tends to mean is that you might cobble projects together as well, do multiple projects under the one financing or delayed funding program. If you want positive cash flow, so if you want the savings to pay for the delayed funding or the financing, then you need good paybacks. And typically you would need paybacks under 5 years. For very big projects, multi-million-dollar projects, you can certainly look at paybacks under 10 years, and typically the paybacks can still be cash flow positive. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit, give you some examples. This is really just a taster. It's not designed to be comprehensive, but obviously the money side of it is a critical issue when trying to introduce ESD into buildings. Okay, for one of the key lessons, I guess, or tasters that we've seen around both sourcing external funding, but also getting funding yourself internally, is it's often easier to make the case once and in a large case. So ask for more money for multiple projects in one hit. As an example, this screen shows you the funding from SEEP round 1, which was a federal government funding program, and around 56% of the funding went to 7 projects, and there were over 100 projects in all. So you can see that if you ask for lots more money in one hit, you often get it. And in fact, from a external funders perspective, that can commonly be a very attractive way of doing it, because they can get rid of their money, which is ultimately what funders want to do. The other thing, the other lesson, I guess, is crafting projects. So you may need to actually change your project to meet financial requirements. And I'll give you an example of that. For the Sustainable Small Facilities Program, which we talked about in the matrix that Lucy showed, that's really targeted at small buildings, not large buildings. And it's simple refits and typically fairly simple projects. We're not talking about cogen, we're not talking about multi-million-dollar projects, we're talking about very simple and smaller projects. This is an example of a council and different projects that can be done. I think it was 100 buildings that were audited and some simple refits were done. What it shows is that you can cut and you can slice and dice the project to meet financial requirements. The key column is the paybacks. So if you wanted to do every single project over those 100 buildings, you'd be looking at around about a 17-year payback. If you went to the option of doing only 7-year paybacks, you start reducing significantly the possible projects that you can deliver. So it's roughly a third of total projects. And again, if you want to get an under 4 or under 5 year payback, it drops to around 10% of total projects. But again, if you don't have money internally and can't get money, then using financing or delayed funding means you can at least do some projects. So if you look at greenhouse savings, although the 4 year payback actions are only 10% of the total project cost, they're nearly half of the greenhouse savings. So significantly, you can do some projects and you can have them fully externally funded if you've got a funding gap or issues in terms of raising internal capital. The last point I guess I want to make around funding and money is that one of the key criteria or key considerations is actually making sure the project doesn't cost more than it needs to. Our experience with group procurement, and you can do group procurement internally. For example, you can pick out 20 buildings instead of one, and you can obviously do it with other councils as well, is that typically group procurement can reduce costs by as much as 25%. And in terms of external funding, there's I'm just going to give you a couple of key lessons of what we've learnt in helping councils gain external funding. One, be prepared. It's pretty self-evident, but having some audits in your back pocket or having a plan as to how you want to deliver efficiency is key. Marketing is a key thing. So this is an example of a project plan for one of the successful SEEP projects I showed just before. And this is an example of that same document with some time spent on marketing. And we saw identical projects not get up as part of SEEP because they didn't have a fancy cover on their document. That's all. Lucy, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. So we've come to the end of our webinar. There are a couple of questions that remain unanswered that we will have to address via email. So thank you everyone for attending. Can I say a special thank you to Maree Grenfell and Euan Williamson for presenting, and a big thank you to everyone else for coming. A couple of closing remarks. A recording of the webinar and also a Sustainable Building Management Options paper will be made available on our website. And if you have any questions that you'd like to email us, feel free. Paul and I will answer them over the next couple of days. Okay, goodbye everyone.